What happens after someone betrays you? Not the obvious part, not the anger, the confusion, or the sleepless nights replaying every moment in your mind. But what happens next? Because here's something most people never talk about. When someone betrays you, they often expect a very specific reaction. They expect you to collapse emotionally. They expect you to chase them for answers. They expect you to prove how much power they still have over you. But what they didn't expect is the psychological shift that can happen when you finally understand what betrayal actually reveals about human behavior. Have you ever noticed that the moment someone betrays you, the entire story suddenly becomes clearer? Little things start connecting. Conversations that once seemed harmless suddenly feel different. Certain looks, certain pauses, certain excuses. And this is where it gets interesting, because betrayal is rarely a sudden event. Psychologically, it's usually the final step in a much longer emotional process that began quietly, long before the moment you discovered it. Before we go deeper, it's important to be clear about something. This conversation is not about revenge. It's not about manipulation. And it's definitely not about encouraging people to hurt others emotionally. This is about awareness. Understanding the psychological dynamics behind betrayal helps you recognize patterns, protect your boundaries, and move through relationships with greater emotional intelligence. Because mature relationships are built on responsibility and respect. And understanding behavior does not mean excusing it. It means learning from it. Now let's talk about the psychology behind betrayal itself. Most people imagine betrayal as purely malicious, but in reality, it often grows from something more complex. Unmet emotional needs, a desire for validation, the pull of novelty, loneliness that someone never communicated honestly, or sometimes something even simpler, ego. Human beings crave attention, not just attention from strangers, but especially attention that feels new, exciting, and unpredictable. When someone stops feeling seen in a relationship, or when they begin seeking emotional stimulation elsewhere, their mind starts creating quiet justifications. This doesn't make betrayal acceptable, but it explains why it happens. And this is subtle, but powerful. Because once that internal justification begins, behavior starts changing in ways that are easy to overlook at first. Pay attention to small shifts. Eye contact becomes slightly different. Not absent, but less steady. Conversations begin containing small pauses where someone seems to mentally filter what they're about to say. Have you ever noticed how someone who's hiding something often changes the rhythm of their speech? Their sentences become shorter. Their tone becomes slightly defensive, even when the topic is neutral. Another signal appears in contrast behavior. In public settings, they may act completely normal, even affectionate. But in private moments, there's a strange emotional distance that wasn't there before. This inconsistency is rarely random. Psychologically, it happens because the brain is managing two different realities at the same time. One is the version of the relationship that others see. The other is the internal conflict the person is trying to hide. And this leads directly into something many people find confusing. Mixed signals, hot and cold behavior. One day they seem emotionally present. The next day they feel distant and distracted. But here's where most people get it wrong. They interpret these shifts as confusion about the relationship. In many cases, it's actually something deeper. Internal conflict. Part of the person still feels attachment and familiarity with you. Another part is chasing novelty, validation, or emotional escape somewhere else. Those two forces create a push and pull dynamic that shows up everywhere. Text messages become slower. Replies feel less engaged. But when you're physically together, they might suddenly act warm again. Why? Because proximity activates guilt. But distance allows rationalization. Here's another interesting pattern. Watch what happens when other people enter the room. Someone hiding something often becomes hyper-aware of how they appear socially. Their tone may shift. Their posture becomes slightly more guarded. This isn't always conscious. It's the brain protecting a secret. And when tension builds internally for too long, something else often happens. Emotional withdrawal. They may suddenly create space, not necessarily through a dramatic breakup, but through subtle disengagement. Less eye contact, less curiosity about your day, less spontaneous conversation. This is the mind preparing distance before the truth fully surfaces. But here's the part they rarely expect. When someone who is betrayed chooses clarity instead of chaos. When instead of chasing explanations, you observe the patterns calmly. When instead of reacting emotionally, you strengthen your boundaries. That psychological shift changes the entire dynamic. Because betrayal often depends on imbalance. One person holding emotional control while the other seeks answers. But when you stop feeding that imbalance, something interesting happens. You regain your center. And that's why understanding behavior matters. Not to control people, not to manipulate outcomes, but to recognize when someone's actions no longer align with your values. Integrity in relationships means honoring commitments, communicating honestly, and respecting the emotional trust another person places in you. When that trust is broken, the healthiest response isn't revenge. It's clarity. Clarity about what you deserve. Clarity about the patterns you will never ignore again. And clarity about the boundaries that protect your emotional well-being moving forward. Because in the end, the real psychological power isn't in exposing someone who betrayed you. It's in becoming the kind of person who can recognize truth quickly, respond with maturity, and move forward without losing your self-respect. And that awareness is something no one can take from you. If you found this insight valuable, make sure you subscribe and stay with this channel. Because understanding human psychology might be one of the most powerful tools you'll ever develop in relationships.